My name is Joe Forte. I am the Digital Humanities Specialist with Virginia Tech Publishing in the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. We're talking about the American Soldier Project, and right now I'm joined by Dr. Kara Vuic from Texas Christian University. Dr. Vuic is the Lance Corporal Benjamin W. Schmidt Professor of War, Conflict, and Society in 20th Century America at TCU. Her research bridges the history of wars and militarization, gender and sexuality, and a social and cultural history. So I thought it would be appropriate to talk to Dr. Vuic on the subject of gender issues that come up in the Transcribathon and the transcriptions in the American Soldier Project. So, Dr. Vuic, the citizen archivists have been transcribing these responses by soldiers during World War II, and while none of the handwritten responses came from women directly, that is, some women were surveyed by the Army during the war who served in the military in some capacity, but the handwritten responses came from servicemen. But the issues of gender and sexuality do arise in some of these free-form responses. And you've had a chance to come into contact with some of these. Could you start by saying briefly what you've noticed in some of these responses and sort of what issues that brings up for you as a scholar of gender and sexuality and of war and militarization?
Yeah, you see in a lot of these handwritten responses that World War II prompted a lot of consternation on the part of the American public about gender change, right? And gender is not a word that most of these GIs would have used and probably didn't use in their handwritten comments, but they're clearly thinking a lot about it. A lot of the men are concerned about the ways that the war seems to have flipped roles or allowed women to enter what they thought of as men's roles. And so there's a lot of sort of consternation about that on the part of the men. You know, one guy says he's afraid he's going to have to go home to hang curtains. Terrible as that might be, he's going to have to hang curtains. But I think what he's really saying is that he's afraid that he's going to go home and domestic roles aren't going to be quite like he expected. Right, that his wife might want to do new things. He's going to have to do new jobs and tasks that he doesn't like. And so you see this kind of fear throughout a lot of the men's comments, both about what they're what they're expecting to see when they go home, but also sort of their opinions of women who were in uniform and serving alongside them during the war.
So in your own work, is this something that you're looking forward to digging into, and what do you hope to find?
Oh, this kind of stuff is just amazing. This is a historian's dream to find this kind of reflection on the part of GIs in the moment, right? That you're seeing what they're thinking at that moment in that war, not colored by or shaped by decades growing older. This isn't the version that they tell their grandkids 40, 50 years later, right? This is what they're thinking when they're 22 and sitting in the middle of France in the mud. And that's the kind of stuff that we really like, because it tells us, what they're thinking in it. And because it's free response, it's not, it's not the kind of standard responses that they've given also in some of these surveys, right? That here's what the Army wants to know, or here's what the Navy wants to know, or whoever, but this is what you think. Now is your chance to sort of gripe about the meals and gripe about your, your conditions, but just to tell us what you think about the war, about going home, about the things you miss.
You mentioned that this is not the story that they're going to tell their grandchildren, right? That in the moment, and so it's also then, apart from popular culture conceptions or triumphalist kind of historical representations, how uncommon is a window like this And does it bring up anything surprising for you? And then maybe not just this type of window, but how, speak a little bit to the value of the crowdsourcing in that sense, right? So it's not just that these citizen archivists are helping process the data, the primary sources faster, but a broad spectrum of the population is coming into direct contact with sources like these. So speak also a little bit to that aspect of it, if you would.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's great that so much of the public can see this kind of sort of immediate response, because a lot of what the public knows or thinks they know about World War II has been framed by media, it's been framed by movies, it's been framed by what you've heard from your great-grandfather now, your grandfather. And so I think it's really great that students in particular, but just everyday folks who are interested in the war can really see just sort of the mundane things that people talk about in war, right? That it's not all battles and charging forward and defeating the enemy. That a lot of what these folks talk about and think about every day is the 23 hours of boredom that precede the one hour of action. And that's the kind of stuff that they really think about and talk about and write about. And so I think that in itself is an important corrective lesson for what Americans think that they know about the war.
So what you said initially about change and the fear of changes in society, you see that reflected in the responses that engage race. You see it in the responses that engage issues of gender, like you said. Is that a large takeaway from a source like this? It speaks to it opens a window onto the fear that these soldiers are expressing, but is it also a window onto the way in which the war did change society on the home front?
Yeah, I think you really see sort of both the potential of the war to open the door to change, and you can also see in that same moment a lot of folks sort of digging their heels in and saying, not so fast, right? Mm-hmm. So I imagine, when Tom talked about race, you can see both of those. You can see, folks who say, well, this war is going to be an opportunity to change things. This war is going to be an opportunity to prove that we are just as committed to the country as everybody else. And then you can see folks worried about what that means when you go home. If we are all the same and we're all fighting the same for the same cause, what does that mean? And with women, you see a lot of that same kind of concern, right? That these men are recognizing that women are serving. And so a big part of their fear is, what does that mean on the other side? Right? When we go home, are they going to be veterans? Are they going to have the same sort of leg up in society that we're going to have? And are we comfortable with that? Right? Yeah. What does it mean if my wife doesn't want to hang curtains? Right? She doesn't want to cook dinner every night. Is that okay? I'm not sure. Right? Some of them, women see the war in many cases as a window or an opportunity to be more independent. And on the other side of that, a lot of the men are very cautious about the war being an opportunity for women to be independent.
The war is also placing the popular conception of what we are fighting for into dialogue with how we are living at home. And in issues of race, you see that expose a hypocrisy in American society. Do women also benefit from sort of the rising to the surface of that hypocrisy, or is it slightly different with regard to gender than it is with race?
I'd say it's similar. For a lot of women who serve in uniform in particular, they're very cognizant of the fact that they are fighting in this war for the same cause as the men, right? And even though they're not on the front lines, right, they're working alongside a lot of men, doing a lot of the exact same jobs as men. And so they're very aware that we're fighting this war for democracy. We're fighting, for all of these ideals, and they're starting to think, some of them anyway, we're starting to think maybe we need to live this out a little bit better when we go home. Not all of them, right? A lot of the case for women is that you're sort of planting the seeds that you see grow 10, 20 years later. For African Americans, particularly African American men who are very, aware that they can't vote if they live in the South, and are increasingly, as the war ends, you see a lot of African American men going home, facing a lot of violence. Those concerns are more immediate. But for women, what you see is that they're starting to recognize, yes, I can do these same jobs as men, right? Even on the home front. I can do these same jobs. I can do these same tasks. I can be part of the same effort. I'm not sure I'm okay with the status quo at the end of this war.
Well, Dr. Vuic, it's been a pleasure talking with you about this. Is there any final point you'd like to make?
No, I think these are great sources. I'm really excited about the project and about the folks who have been using these sources. I think it's going to be a great resource for students who are writing about World War II or interested in the 1940s. And I'm really excited to see what happens next.